Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are going to discuss a topic that has been told millions and millions and millions and millions of times. However, I'm going to take a real close look on the life of Walter Elias Disney. Some of you may know him as just Walt Disney. So what we're going to do today is we're going to basically look at the life that he had before, a struggling animator who no one believed in could do anything successful. No one had any faith in his visions of his company, to one of the most recognizable names in pop culture history and one of the biggest brands in the world. Before we start, if you like these kind of videos and want to see more of them, please hit the like and subscribe button and the notification bell if you want to see any more of these videos in the future. So we're going to start from the beginning. So Walter Elias Disney, born on December 5th, 1901 in Chicago, Illinois, with his father Elias and his mother Flora Disney. Like most kids, Walter loved to draw. However, he was a little bit different in a way, as unlike most kids who did love drawing, he was fascinated by it. A little bit later in Walter's life, his family decided to move to Kansas City, where they would settle down on a farm. Now, on this farm, Walter would become a little bit mischievous in the eyes of his father by sketching a lot on the barn instead of doing his chores, which his dad wasn't very happy with. However, in the fall of 1918, Walter had to put his dreams of animating and drawing aside for the time being, as he entered the military. However, he was rejected as he was too young at the time, so he then attended the Red Cross. It was said, as he attended the Red Cross overseas, he would drive an ambulance, and in this ambulance you would find a lot of his little sketches and drawings that he would do in his spare time. Now, Walter only spent a year in the Red Cross, and by 1919 he returned to Kansas City. Unfortunately, during this time, his father Elias did pass away. With that, Walter did return to Kansas City to then continue his dream of animation. He done that by getting a job at an advertisement company that specializes in cartoons, called Pesman Rubin Commercial Art Studio, where there he found someone very, very important to Walt's early life, Ub Iwerks. By this point, Walt decided to leave the advertising company, and together with his brother Roy, they then make their own cartoon animation business called Laugh-O-Gram, alongside Ub, who we met in the advertising studio, and Rudolph Ising. However, the company did go bankrupt a few years later in 1923, losing all of his staff as he was unable to pay for their wages. Many of you might know Ising to become a rival of Disney alongside Hugh Harman, after they left later on in 1928 due to a dispute between Walt and Charles Mintz in the topic of the ownership and rights to Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, who we will discuss later on. This then led to the now former employees of Disney to go their separate ways. However, Ising and Harman decided to join up with Warner Bros. Studios, a rival studio to Disney, and then later on created the Looney Tunes cartoons, which many of you may know as some of the, other than Disney cartoons at the time especially, some of the most popular cartoon series on the planet. In terms of Charles Mintz, he took ownership of Oswald and kept it for quite a long time. Now Disney have bought back the rights to Oswald now, but at the time Disney then lost their full rights to Oswald, who at the time was a very successful cartoon series for Disney, and it was what kind of shifted the name Disney into the public eye. A little known Easter egg towards Charles Mintz was then later added in the film Up by Pixar by calling the villain of the film Charles Muntz, who obviously is known in the film to be someone who steals artifacts and properties from other explorers to then showcase for himself, so it makes him look more famous. And kind of that was the impression that Disney had of Charles after that point, as he felt like Oswald was stolen from him. I kind of just wanted to get the Harmon, Ising and Mintz names out of the way, just because I want this video to be a bit more like about Walt. But I felt like them three people in particular, I felt like was very important to mention, mainly just because of the history that they had with Walt. So in August of 1923, Walt decided to leave Kansas City for California, specifically Hollywood. He did, however, attempt to get into the acting business in Hollywood, however wasn't very successful. By this point, Roy, his brother, was already a resident of California by the time Walter moved to California, and they realised at the time Hollywood wasn't much of a place for cartoon animation. It was very live action productions, very in-person stuff, no animation, no drawing, no nothing. There wasn't many studios in California at the time. So Walt and Roy decided to make this a perfect opportunity to open their new animation studio in California. They decided to call the studio at the time Disney Brothers Studio, which obviously now we all know as Walt Disney Company. At the time, Walt hired back all of his animators who were a part of the Laugh-O-Gram studio, being Iwerks, Ising, Hardman, and also their producer Mintz. They managed to have their first breakthrough in New York City, where they produced a take on the book Alice in Wonderland, which is a story that Walt does repeat a creation of later on. However, throughout the 1920s, the biggest success Walt and Roy had in the studio was Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. If you want to, on Disney Plus, there is the animations for Oswald there. It is a very like Steamboat Willie kind of animation, which we are about to talk about. We now move on to the mouse that changed everything. So after losing Oswald to Mintz, Disney had to create a new character to showcase his cartoons, and in 1928 Walt created Steamboat Willie, which was the first ever fully synchronized cartoon and sound, which at the time was a massive revolutionary thing in animation. Steamboat Willie first premiered in Colony Theatres in New York in the November of that year, which then obviously Steamboat Willie was a massive success, and Walt decided to name the mouse Mickey, which we now call Mickey Mouse. Now with Mickey Mouse, even after Walt's passing, Mickey Mouse has now continued to be the face of Disney and has been one of the most recognisable cartoon characters, alongside Ising's creation of Bugs Bunny and Popeye, etc. Even the likes of DreamWorks characters like Shrek and stuff like that. Even though they are very big names like Bugs Bunny and Shrek, Mickey Mouse continues to be one of the most recognisable faces in a cartoon. However, like most things in Walt's life, it wasn't easy to get people on board, as it took almost 300 attempts to get investors involved in the studio. It did take a lot on Walt to create the success of Mickey Mouse, as he caused himself to overwork, which caused a lot of exhaustion and tension throughout the studio, which led Walt to take some time off after he was reported to have a nervous breakdown within the studio. Walt's success then continued throughout the 1930s. This, however, was just the beginning for Walt. With his success in the short animation films, Walt decided to look beyond the horizon, as he always does, and tries to dream bigger, with the challenge of creating a full-length animated film, which at the time had never been done before and was considered a really big risk on Walt's company. However, in 1937, Disney first premiered Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which became a major box office hit. And following the success of Snow White, Walt went on to create Pinocchio in 1940 and Bambi in 1942, which at the time neither Pinocchio or Bambi made the same success as Snow White. Obviously nowadays Pinocchio and Bambi are considered major films within the Disney catalogue, but in terms of creating the same drive and profit that Snow White did, it didn't near match the success of it. Also to mention that in 1940 the film Fantasia was filmed, which now is considered a very big part of the Walt Disney Company, being in merchandise, being in TV shows, and now it's got its kind of own show in Hollywood studios in Orlando, Florida, where Fantasmic is one of the nighttime shows that is showcased in the park, and personally is one of my favourite nighttime shows Disney have ever done. Now unfortunately, obviously with the lack of success Bambi, Fantasia and Pinocchio created compared to Snow White, World War II was on the brink of beginning, and a lot of the animators who worked for Disney at the time got drafted into the war, leaving not a lot of animators left to create more projects. However, Walt didn't give up with that and tried to create as much as he possibly could with whatever little he had, creating the likes of the Three Caballeros, etc. Because I can't name them all off the top of my head, but that's the one that kind of sticks out the most, especially in terms of longevity, because it's probably the one out of all the films that he created in World War II, during World War II, that is probably more remembered, as it's got a little ride in Walt Disney World in Epcot. So, after World War II, Disney was ambitious to create another masterpiece. Walt struggled to pay back almost $4 million worth of debt before the war, and groundbreaking animation they did create, as in 1950 they created the very famous Cinderella, which was then the first full-length feature animated film in over 8 years by Disney. Cinderella was considered one of the biggest successes Disney have ever created, as it profited almost $5.8 million in its first year. Walt, however, wasn't exactly fully immersed in the production of Cinderella, as at the time Disney were also creating the live-action version of Treasure Island and Robin Hood. During this time, more full-length feature animated films were created, alongside the 1951 Alice in Wonderland and the 1953 film Peter Pan. Although a success to the animation studio, was given less attention and was trusted with only a few animators at the time who Walt considered trustworthy to handle a project this important. Now, in terms of a very important milestone in Walt's life, Walt was about to attempt something that had never been done before. Again, something that was going to cost him a lot of money, that was definitely going to get him in massive amounts of debt, however, became a massive success in the Walt Disney Company. Was it probably going to lead to the company going into bankruptcy again? Probably so. However, when has that ever stopped Walt before? As he was about to create Disneyland, a park like no other before. And with that, the words of Walt himself: "To all who come to this happy place, welcome." This, in terms of my research on this video, was the most fun part of it, because that's the bit I love about Disney the most. The films are fantastic, everything about it, but being immersed in those parks is something that is unrecognisable to anything else on this planet. At the time, there was no such thing as a standalone theme park. Mostly at the time you had like fairgrounds and fun fairs and stuff that were like a travelling fair that would go from like town to town, state to state, etc, etc. In terms of a one that I can kind of describe that's kind of close to the representation of like a fun fair, if you have ever watched Stranger Things, in season 3, there is like a segment of like a fairground that's kind of like the sort of the scenery that you would see at a generic American fun fair. Walt, however, wanted to change that, as it was very high in the reputations of fun fairs at the time, where it was very dirty, very unsafe, as like most of the rides would just get chucked up. It wasn't exactly a place where it was considered 100% family friendly, and not exactly 100% kids friendly either. And Walt kind of had this idea where he wanted to create something that he would want to take his daughters to, which is kind of wholesome and kind of quite cute at the same time. Walt kind of took the little bit of an inspiration for Disneyland when he took a vacation to Europe, and he saw all the kind of like fun fairs and theme parks that we had over in Europe at the time. However, at the time, later on after Disneyland got built, Walt did do an interview and mentioned that he wanted to create a park where kids and adults could enjoy. So if anyone thought that Disney adults were weird, Walt intended for them in the first place. So thank you, Walt. So with that, Walt decided to buy a property of land in Anaheim, California, which was 35 miles south of the Walt Disney Studio. So in order to help fund the park, Walt decided to have a fantastic idea to broadcast the progress of them building the park itself. In order to help with this, because not a lot of broadcasters were willing to do this sort of thing, Walt found a very small broadcasting company in America that were absolutely perfectly willing to risk it and create this series of like a weekly series that they would produce, showcasing the progress of the construction. Many of you will now know as the American Broadcasting Company, or as many of you will mostly know it as ABC. The show itself actually was quite a massive success amongst American TVs across the country. A lot of people tuned in to watch the progress of this magical park being made. And then in July of 1955, Disneyland Anaheim opened its doors for the first time, with ABC broadcasting the whole day of the first day of the park being open. Any Disney fan will recognise the first day of Disneyland being open. It kind of really showcased the I did it moment for Walt. It was then broadcasted live outside of the Anaheim Disneyland Park before it opened, and done a lovely speech, most famously for the line, "To all who come to this happy place, welcome." Most people recognise this day, however, as quite an unsuccessful day at Disneyland. Disneyland had a lot of issues on that day. One mainly being because they either had to have running water or have working toilets, as there was a plumbing strike at the time. It was also a heat wave in California at the time, which wasn't ideal, especially for choosing water or toilets. Rides started to also malfunction quite frequently on the first day. And because at the time people created forged tickets for the park's first day of opening, it was considered extremely overcrowded for what the park staff were intending to expect. Apart from the first day of Disneyland opening, however, since then, Disneyland has welcomed millions and millions and millions of guests every single day, being a major success for the most part. And with that now we have multiple parks around the world, being obviously the Anaheim, California, and then we've got Orlando, Paris, Hong Kong, and Shanghai, and the two in Japan with Tokyo Disney and Tokyo Disney Sea. Unfortunately, however, we are coming towards the end of Walt's story. Walt was still the owner of the Disney company all the way through his life until his passing, showing that he never stepped down and never quit on what he helped build. With many film premieres and TV shows released during Walt's last couple of years in Disney, Walt decided to broaden his horizons in terms of the parks and built a brand new park in Orlando, one in particular being Disney World. However, the Magic Kingdom side of it, he kind of left to the Imagineers to deal with, as they were basically going to create a very similar park to what they had in California anyways. However, the one Walt was mostly interested in was the experimental prototype community of tomorrow, or as many of you will know it as Epcot. Now, Epcot, many Imagineers at the time consider is Walt's baby. It was Walt's original idea. It was Walt's most fascinating sort of idea that he had at the time. He unfortunately never got to see this open. He never got to see Walt Disney World open at all, and he never got to see his Epcot, and no one else did ever. As a lot of you might know, the Epcot that we know today isn't the Epcot that Walt envisioned, as there was a little snippet short that Walt filmed discussing Epcot. Basically, Walt wanted Epcot to be an actual estate where people lived, worked, and had a whole life living in Disney. He didn't want it to be a park. He didn't want it to be an entertainment thing. He wanted Epcot to basically be a place where people would live and try and create a revolutionized world of tomorrow. With that, in terms of Disney World, Walt decided to purchase 43 square miles of land in Orlando. Walt unfortunately didn't make it very far into the concept of the Epcot he wanted to create, as in December 15th, 1966, Walt alias Disney unfortunately passed away, 5 years before Disney World was to open. With this being said, that means California is the only park Walt ever actually seen open. Unfortunately, with his passing, Walt didn't exactly have a lot written down in terms of the concept of the Epcot he wanted, which then made Imagineers have to rethink the idea into a theme park. However, Imagineers did excel at creating the theme of Epcot as the community of tomorrow. As many may know, if you were to go to Epcot, you are considered a resident of Epcot, kind of leaving that sort of idea that you are a part of Epcot, you are a part of the vision of tomorrow, just like Walt Disney wanted to create in the first place. This is showcased a lot throughout the park, mainly in my experience of Epcot. The one that stands out to me the most is the Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind, as in the pre-show in the queue, the character played by Terry Crews calls you citizens of Epcot. And with that, Walt Disney World, the Magic Kingdom park anyways, opened in 1971 and Epcot opened in 1982, being a massive success in the Walt Disney Company. So to conclude this story of Walt, what have we learned about Walter's life? The parts that I kind of took away from doing this video was that no matter how many people told him he couldn't do it, no matter how many times he failed, Walt still decided to keep on going. And luckily he did, because now we've got the Disney that we know today. And I feel like without his imagination and without his drive and vision, I feel like something like Disney would have never existed. So in terms of Walt himself, what legacy did he leave behind? Walt left behind a legacy more than anyone else could ever imagine. His legacy is a true testament of hard work and dedication that helped his dreams come true. Since his passing, Disney has now become a global entertainment powerhouse, drawing fans in across the world in terms of movies, TV and parks, allowing Disney to create magical moments in all aspects of entertainment. However, is the Disney today the Disney Walt would have wanted? In terms of that, I'll let you decide that down in the comments below. And with that, thank you so much for watching this video today. I hope you really enjoyed it. I definitely really enjoyed making it and researching it and all that. My links for my Instagram is down below if you want to like and subscribe to this video and turn notification bells on if you want to see the next video I have coming up. as it is about owners of Disney who had to fill the boots of Walt, i.e. his brother, Michael Eisner, Bob Iger, etc. And we are also going to discuss in that video the now future CEO of Disney. So yeah, that is everything today. I hope you really enjoyed it, and see you in the next one.